Well, greetings and welcome to a fireside chat where we're looking at this third video for the Facebook page on the course that I taught at Luther Seminary on Beyond Question. This one will be probably the longest of the four, dealing with using Beyond Question as a methodology for resolving congregational conflict, using this as a concept, remember, for future use. What I really suggested during the class is for people to use this during Lent, and then following Lent, put together a vision team or a 2020 team or whatever it might be. Read through Leading on Purpose with your church council or your church leadership or your vision team, because once people start to ask empowering solution-based questions in your congregation, it'll start to turn around the way in which you resolve congregational conflict, moving forward, little piddly things that oftentimes bother pastors. And this gives you a step forward toward working with your congregation toward a vision team through April, May, and June, and then implementation during the summer. So consider that as a part of a larger picture of what's being accomplished with this Beyond Question. Again, remember that Beyond Question is a methodology that Jesus used for deepening discipleship. It's also, when you start to ask yourself learner-based rather than judger-based questions, like Jesus did, you begin to resolve issues because you're looking for empowering answers from your empowered questions, and you look at solutions rather than just the problems themselves. So really it's a methodology for deepening discipleship, and in this session I'd like to just step back and look at it in terms of resolving congregational conflict. It's on page it is on page 40 in your handout if you have the PDF from the files above. Also the Beyond video talks, those are very helpful, and also your Beyond Question book. Those are the three things that you really need in front of you as we get into this. So page 40, using Beyond as a methodology for resolving congregational conflict. Let me suggest to you that if you read on the first couple paragraphs there on page 40, congregations are in conflict. It's epidemic. It's simply the way it is in this day and age. If you're not in the midst of conflict, you've probably just come out of it in your congregation, or in the next couple of years you'll go into it. Whether it's sexuality, whether it's building fund, whether it's getting rid of the pastor, whether it's whatever it is, congregations normally go through conflict. And the first handout, first line there, remember that conflict is inevitable, but combat isn't. Conflict is inevitable, but combat isn't. And one way to work your way through conflict is to use Beyond as a methodology for resolving congregational conflict. I'm going to be talking kind of fast. I apologize for that. I just want to get in as much as possible. You may want to pause this here and there as we go through it. But part of what I'm sharing with you in this section here for 12-14 minutes is a little bit of what I've learned from Peter Steinke. He's got masterful books about resolving congregational conflict and being a non-anxious presence. It's masterful stuff, and once you get through this Beyond, look into some Peter Steinke stuff and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I came to this partially by starting to talk to pastors who were in conflict. It used to be that I would talk to the successful pastors and find out what's going on there and then try to replicate what they were doing in my place. Well, I ended up doing too much ping pong ministry, you know, just kind of going from one to the next, what works, and ended up not putting in place systemic long-term spiritual DNA change in the way the congregation I was serving thought, changing their thought pattern. And so I just kind of kept ping-ponging from one to the next, thinking that I would find out what works. Well, the fact of the matter is, don't do that, because nothing works. Nothing works as a one-stop shop for resolving congregational life and getting everything back in the way that you have in your dreams. Nothing works to get that way. But this gets you on the road toward discovering ways that you can finally bring that about. Long-term process. I talk about that in the book, Leading on Purpose. A 3 to 5 year process using this kind of methodology, though I didn't hardly know it at the time when I was writing the book, but a 3 to 5 year process to set your pants on fire. I mean, seriously, it'll blow your dress up, man. It will set your pants on fire for ministry in your congregation. That's what's happened at Zion, and that's what I'm so excited about sharing this with you. I said that I went to successful pastors and tried to replicate. Instead, what I started to do about 8 years ago, I started calling pastors who were going through difficulty. Pastors who were going through a divorce or treatment or got booted out of their congregation. And I found two things very common. One is that they oftentimes said, thanks for calling me. Or, I mean, I'd call them and say, hey, dude, just thinking about you, just wanted to see how things are going. Inevitably, I heard from them almost universally, thanks for calling, Eric. Nobody's called. Because people don't call pastors in distress. They're kind of discarded by the side of the road. Second thing I learned is from the mistakes that they made. Congregational life is a minefield. It is a minefield. You probably already know that. And navigating your way through a minefield, you can do it one of two ways. One, you can run as fast as possible, hoping to get to the other side with as many limbs still intact, or you can find out where the mines are and kind of walk around and avoid and not do what I call stupid pastor tricks that end up nuclear bombing you, your ministry, and your congregation. So nobody calls pastors who have been through trauma, and talk to enough of them, and not only do they appreciate your phone call because you care, but also you can kind of find out what fields, once they trust you enough, what kind of fields, landmines that they walked through that exploded on them. So on to the Steinke stuff. Steinke says that the brain operates with these three priorities. You might want to write this down in the middle of page 4. The first part, he says, Steinke says we have a triune brain. The first part, the lower part, is a reptilian part of the brain. The reactive, defensive, you might want to write some words down there. The survival, the primitive, the brainstem part of the brain. This part of the brain has no concept of time, meaning that when I was on the street in Paris, when I was in 3rd grade, I heard a sound behind me. I turned around, and all of a sudden there was a German Shepherd, same height as me, teeth, huge teeth, barred at me, growling. I thought I was going to be devoured. Now, many years later, past 3rd grade, when I'm riding my bike, when I'm taking a walk, when I get out of the car to visit someone, and a dog comes lunging at me, it's right there. I'm right back on that street in Paris. That same kind of paralyzing fear comes on me because a primitive, reactive, reptilian part of the brain, that defensive part, kicks in, and since it has no concept of time, it goes right back. The reason that that's important in congregational life. Do you ever wonder why Mrs. Johnson gets so ticked off at you when you suggest something about the kitchen? That's because a pastor 40 years ago got mad at her when he tried to remodel a kitchen, put in blue carpeting instead of the red one that she wanted, whatever it is. She got so ticked off at him that it kind of went to that, she became so defensive that 40 years later she still feels that same reaction when you want to change something. Put it into play in your congregation. Sometimes when you wonder about why something causes such a stir, it's because it comes from the other person's brainstem reptilian reactive part, and it just goes out because that part of the brain has no concept of time. The second part of the brain, you might want to write in relationships, or mammalian I have right in there, the limbic. That's the play part of the bonding, playing, feeling part of the brain. You know, remember the first time you were really in love. You could hardly sleep. You couldn't eat. You broke out into a sweat whenever she was near, partially because that limbic part of the brain starts firing, and it doesn't kind of stop. It just kind of wants keeping to play, relationships, bonding, feeling, non-rational. Both of those parts of the brain are non-rational. Not that they're irrational, but that they're non-rational. They're not linear ways of thinking. The brainstem is reptilian, the mammalian, there's no rationality there. The third part of the brain, which occupies 85% of our heads, is the frontal lobes, neocortex, whatever you want to call it. That's where we do our thinking, our imagination, our reflection. 85% of the capacity of our brain is in our frontal lobes, neocortex, whatever you want to call it. That's where our Christian values are. That is where our Christian values are, of love, kindness, respect, restraint, compromise. Christian values are there, but the higher the anxiety is in a system, in a congregational system, the higher the anxiety, the lower part of the brain the reaction comes from. That's why we call them reptiles or alligators. So don't call Mrs. Johnson an alligator. But when there's high anxiety, the lower brainstem starts firing and you react, and oftentimes it's non-rational, sometimes even irrational, because it's not coming from the neocortex frontal lobes. Anxiety has to do with feeling threatened. Feeling threatened. So what part of the brain does that come from? The one that has to do with safety and defensiveness. That's the brainstem. That's the reptilian part of the brain. The higher the anxiety in a system, in a family, in a relationship, in a congregation, the higher the anxiety, the lower part of the brain the reactions come from. I really do think this is a highly anxious time in congregational lives, in Lutheran congregations, that it's incredible high anxiety, and so the reactions that should come from our neocortex, our frontal lobes, our Christian values of love and respect and tolerance and all of that don't get to fire because it's so highly anxious that it comes from, our reactions come from the lower parts. So with those three parts, on the bottom of page 40, what most anxious situations, context, issues needed is exactly what they can't get. That is our Christian values, which comes from the clarity portions of our brain, the neocortex frontal lobes. Very, very important. Higher the anxiety, and the bottom line on page 40. The best way to get to our Christian values is asking solution-based empowering questions like, what would it look like if, and you start to imagine, you start to move the anxiety into a solution-based empowering kind of questions, getting the reaction out of the reptilian part and starts to go through the play part, the relationship, into the neocortex, frontal lobes, and all of a sudden you start to rewire people's reactive brains into solution-based empowering questions. That's why I think this stuff is so important. 10 triggers of anxiety, you can read that there. Money. Anybody having money issues? Sex, sexuality, styles of worship, pastor's leadership style, old versus new, growth or survival. On the ELCA page, don't you see a whole lot of stuff about growth or survival? What are we going to do? It's just epidemic. Staff conflicts, resignation of staff members, that's what we had at Zion. High anxiety, internal, external focus. Are we a gated community? Or, like I've been telling the people at Zion, do we exist, which I think we do, for the sake of those who don't yet know Jesus? I keep saying, man, are we a gated community, or are we ones out wanting to share the goodness of what we know with those around us? So which one would you think that we are? What would the characteristics of a gated community church look like? What would a church look like with a wide open front door for people who need to know Jesus out there, excuse me, in the community. Death of a child, pastor, suicide, major community issues. So think of this. If you had an iguana, I don't know, what kind of question would you ask an iguana? Probably not too much. Iguanas don't quite know what to think. Same part of the reptilian brain that when there's high anxiety, those questions can't get anywhere. It takes time. It takes time. Bottom third of page 41. When seeking to provide non-anxious leadership in turbulent times, a pastor and church leaders need to, number one, practice being a non-anxious presence. Non-anxious presence. One of the women at Zion, after I'd been here for about 6 months, came up to me and she said, Pastor Eric, she said, one thing I've noticed about you is that you're always so calm. I said, oh my goodness gracious sakes alive, me calm? She said, you're just always so calm. You don't get riled up, you don't get depressed, you don't, you're just so calm. Well, I call that non-anxious presence. Number two, respect the power of the emotional forces in your congregation. If you don't respect them, those emotional forces, they will overpower you. If you don't respect those emotional powers and forces, they will overpower you. Number three, differentiate, self-differentiate, and focus on lowering anxiety. On the ELCA Facebook page, you see that all the time. People, pastors on that list, sometimes can't self-differentiate and lower anxiety. They kind of feed into it, and there's a limbic storm and an anxiety and all this kind of stuff, and they feed into it, and they want to be right, and so they argue back. That's so not the point. They're on that judger mindset. They end up in the judger pit rather than being on the learner path and ending up in a resolution way where there's a win-win. Number four, provide leadership so that you do not become a host cell for anxiety. Anxiety loves company. Anxiety looks for a host cell to infect, and once that happens, anxiety spreads like wildfire, or leavens a whole loaf, or poisons a well, to mix metaphors. Important Steinke stuff. Number five, top of page 42. Remember that anxiety spawns data. Memos, emails. I mean, email hell happens in more congregations than I'd like to even think. People start to email. I mean, it's just crazy. Anxiety spawns data. And what I've noticed over the years, here's a little piece of advice. When you get a highly anxious email, look at the time in which it was sent. If it's sent at 10:30 p.m. on a Friday night, just delete it. If it's sent at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, pay attention to it. People, after a couple drinks, they start to kind of whatever on a Friday or Saturday night, they push that send and then they regret it the next morning. Well, by that time you've already gotten it. Watch the time of those emails that you get, the highly anxious emails, because sometimes it's important to notice what time they come. Not that everybody's a drinker in your congregation, but you'll find that is more true than not. Number six, always remember that what you focus on is where you'll end up. That is the topic of one of the devotions that you'll see. Number seven, remember that conflict is inevitable, but combat is avoidable. 7 steps to healthy congregation. Just read through those. I spent some time at class doing that, but I'm not going to do that here. So, at the bottom of page 42, that's a sermon series I preached September 2011. What if? What do you think? What would Zion look like? What might be some characteristics if Zion Lutheran Church was known throughout Redmond as a place where the gospel is preached, the lost are found, the believers are equipped, the needy are served, the lonely unfolded into a community, and God gets the credit for it all? each week I repeated that for those 7 weeks in that 7-week sermon series. What if? What would it look like? Just kind of play with what that might look like. So, page 43 in the handout, we're looking at what do you want me to do for you? The question of soteriology. If you haven't written those words in the front of your book, the flow of things, you might want to do that. And you'll see now kind of the method to the madness of this book. Week 1, what are you looking for? Question of identity, who we are. What we're looking for tells a story of who we are. Week 2, where's your faith? Story of commitment. Week 3, who do you say that I am? Question of Christology. Number 4, what do you want me to do for you? It's a question of soteriology, because you have to answer the Christological question of who you say Jesus is before you answer the question, what do you think he can do for you? That's the, whatever you want to call it, the method to the madness of that. One great song is Jason Gray, Remind Me Who I Am. It's in the notes, but look at that. It's an awesome song. So, what we're going to do is turn to page 44. Maybe just kind of skim through that. Third paragraph from the bottom on page 44, I want to underline that. Pennington says that probably our greatest sin is that we expect too little from ourselves and for ourselves because we expect too little from God. We don't ask because we don't believe that God will give it to us, or that we question whether God has the goodwill to do it for us. Jesus shows his goodwill here and his passion to serve us. So I said in the class, and I do believe, that that we have a soteriology where we don't expect much from God. I mean, we want God to be the vending machine God in the hospital times or times of sickness or something like that, but just if we don't expect much out of God, and so we don't ask much out of God. Maybe it's because we've been disappointed in the past. Maybe God didn't give us that A on a report card when we were in 3rd grade. But whatever it is, we don't ask much from God. Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And we say, well, I don't know, because I don't know what you can do for me. This is a very critical question. Bottom of the page 44, even a deeper question is, what do I truly believe that Jesus is willing to do for me? Read through that. It's all very important stuff. What do you think Jesus can do for you? I believe that we have a low estimation of what Jesus can do for us, and so we don't ask. We say, yes, Jesus is Lord and Savior, but what can he do for us? Struggle with that question. If you're in small groups doing this one, maybe just have them break into groups and just say, what do you think Jesus can do for you? What has he done for you in the past? It's a dangerous question to ask, but I think it's worth asking. So go through the rest of those pages. The blind beggar wins Jesus over on page 46. Lots of different frequently asked questions. So I'm going to skip over to the Beyond Question video talks. And what do you want me to do for you? We are on day, excuse me for a moment, day 19. Day 19, what do you want me to do for you? 2 blind men sitting by the side of the road. Jesus was passing by. It's a blind Bartimaeus story. Jesus stood still. There's an emphasis on that in the devotion. One of the few times that Jesus stood still. I mean, the guy's on the move all the time. He stood still. He stood still and asked them, what do you want me to do for you? And they said, let our eyes be opened. In some ways, it's the same as the guy from the pool of Siloam. Jesus says, do you want to be healed? He says, yeah, but every time I jump into the water, I need somebody to help me into the water. He kind of missed it. He wanted to do it yourself, faith. Do it yourself, DIY. Here, Jesus says, so what do you want me to do for you? The blind beggar said, the reason that it's important that these questions are asked is because if the blind beggars or Bartimaeus would have said to Jesus when he said, what do you want me to do for you? If they would have said, you know, I'm just really craving a you know, sauerkraut and ham and Swiss cheese sandwich. How's that? Jesus would have sent the disciples down to the deli and he would have gotten a sandwich for them. What do you want me to do for you? Like I just said, I think we oftentimes don't ask Jesus to do too much because we don't expect a lot out of him. I mean, are we willing to say that he walks with me and he talks with me and it tells me I am his own, and that he's integrally involved, and that we have a personal relationship that's real and personal with him? Then if that's our soteriology and our Christology, then, oh man, what do you want me to do for you? Give me a life of significance and meaning and help me move forward. Make this be the best decade ever. And I'm willing to do my part in that and change my life around and amend everything I'm doing. Makes a difference. So, day 20, let's look at that in the book. Do you lack anything? Just remember who you are. Day 21 is the whole question of which is easier, declaring forgiveness or healing. You can easily talk about forgiveness there. I think the issue of resentments is a much bigger issue than forgiveness. That's a whole nother topic, and if you look on YouTube, do a search on resentments and Eric Burtness, you'll see a sermon that I preached on resentments. Very important sermon that I preached about a year ago that ties into this theme. Day 22. The issue of crowd was sitting around him, you know, who's my brothers, who's my sister, family of God. You can do all of those kinds of sermons from that, which obviously you have done many different times. Day 23, can its saltness be restored? Salt was a preservative in Jesus' day. Some things were kept from going from good to decay because of salt. Things were kept from rotting because of salt. You know, you don't want to be moralistic about it, but you might ask the question, are Christians called to be a moral preservative in a decaying world? I mean, are Christians called to do what we can to make a society better by our Christian values and commitments for our kids? And what can we do together in this gun crazy, violent crazy culture where 500 people are killed in Chicago with handguns? You don't want to just focus on handguns, but that's not the issue. But when we, like I said, when we abdicate responsibility and put everything on somebody else, who's to blame for this? The NRA is partially to blame. Homes and schools and churches and parents and all kinds of stuff. We all have skin in the game. We all have skin in the game in resolving the violent culture that allows all of this kind of stuff to happen. Not just the NRA. They have their part. We have our parts. What are we willing to do? Question. What are we willing to do to be salt preserving in a world gone bad? What are we willing to do is more of a question that maybe some of your people would be willing to talk about. And then when you get past the blame, it's their fault, and start to insource instead of outsource responsibility, then what can we do about it? What individually can we do about it might be a topic for conversation. We get then to page 20, to day 24. What is the kingdom of God like? You can read through that. I won't go into that so much. So, going back to our book, our handout on page 40, what do you want me to do for you? The worship helps on, I'm extremely organized in this. Page 48 are the worship helps. What do you want me to do for you? Things that you can kind of hang your hat on, both texts and song. Potter's Hand on page 49 is an awesome one. It's an old one, but it's awesome. Remind Me Who I Am by Jason Gray is a 2011 song. Look it up on YouTube, the one where he's playing the guitar and he's got little post-its. It's totally awesome. Week 5 gets us to the question of the heart. Week 5 is kind of a fundamental week. Do you love me is a question of Jesus in John chapter 20. Week 5 and 6, we're looking at the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. Week 5 is Jesus on the beach. Week 6 is Jesus on the road to Emmaus. Fascinating. There's also a little video. Search on YouTube for "This is Discipleship." This is discipleship. A great little video that you might show. You also might show in here. Do a little YouTube search on Tevye singing, "Do you love me? Do I what? Do you love me?" Because that's the question that Jesus was asking at the end. He says, "But do you love me?" She says, "Yeah, I suppose I do." It's phileo. Anyway, we'll get into that. Just bookmark that in your mind, because that is an awesome, it's an awesome video. So, day 25. Look at the verses on page 50 in the handout. Have your book in front of you. Page 51 in the booklet, there's just a number of things there. Love is mandate, mission, message. Just kind of skip through that a little bit. Page 52 in the booklet, page 53. Have a relationship that's real, recognize his presence, enjoy his company, accept his invitation, look to his leadership. But what is fascinating, page 54, when we talk about the phileo agape kind of love that Jesus is asking for, what you might want to do in a very easy way in a sermon is differentiate that Peter's problems always came when he took his eyes off Jesus. Look on page 54. Took his eyes on Jesus on a stormy sea. He looked at the storm. Took his eyes off Jesus on a mountain. He says, "Dude, this is cool. Let's build a little carnival hut up here in the courtyard." Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And then on the beach, Jesus asks him 3 times, gives him a chance to, I really believe, redeem himself, undo those other 3. You probably preached on that before. But what's fascinating is the change of words that Jesus uses in John chapter 20 on those questions on the beach. So we're going to go to day 25 in the video handouts, and one of the fascinating things there, it's an important week. Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, do you agape me?" Peter says, "Yeah, I phileo you." Jesus says to Peter a second time, "Do you agape me? Do you love me with a everlasting sacrificial kind of love?" And Peter says, "Yeah, dude, knuckle bump, I love you, man, phileo." Third time, Jesus says, "Peter, do you phileo me? Are we buds? City of brotherly love?" I mean, you know the whole thing. Peter was sad because he asked him a third time, and he kind of wondered, why isn't he asking the other guys? And he says, "Yeah, you know, dude, we played poker last week. I mean, yeah, we hang out." Peter wasn't able to give the answer, "Dear Lord, yes, I agape you." Notice the importance of the change of words there, because what's really happening is that Jesus was looking for an agape love from Peter, but he realized he wasn't going to be able to get it. And so he said, "Man, dude, knuckle bump, phileo, do you love me?" Peter says, yeah, we're buds. Big important point here. Jesus loved Peter exactly the way he was, unconditionally, without restraint, without condition, but he loved him far too much to let him stay that way. Loved him far too much to let him stay that way. This whole journey has been coming to that point. It continues, of course, but that whole journey, the journey part of this, the transformative personal journey, doesn't matter where you are in the journey. Doesn't matter where you are. Jesus loves you wherever you are on that journey. Phileo, agape, whatever it might be, loves you on that journey exactly the way you are. No condition, no question about it. But at the same time, loves you too much to let you stay that way. You know, when my kids were young, oh my goodness gracious sakes alive, each one of my 3, I loved changing diapers. I mean, they'd do a little fart and I'd say, I gotta change her diaper. I mean, I loved changing diapers because it was a way of intimate love, touch, being with them, cleaning them up. and putting the diaper back on, snuggle him again, get him all, washed up, put him, I did more baby clothes, laundry, just constant. Love babies. I'm glad they didn't stay that way. I have 3 of the best kids in the world. They're unbelievable kids. I loved them as babies. Loved them. I didn't want them to stay that way. I'm glad Matthew's 28 and a school teacher. Alex is 25 and married down in San Diego with the Navy, all that stuff. Laura's a 6-foot water polo player down at Santa Clara. I love them the way they are. And yet when Laura gets, she's 20, probably when she's 35 when she gets married. Laura signed a contract when she was 4 years old that she wouldn't date until she got married. Kind of one of those manipulative dad kind of things, but a bit easier than buying a shotgun. I love them the way they are now, but I don't want them to stay 20 years old. I want Laura to eventually, all my kids to grow. Love them just the way they are. Love them too much to let them stay that way. You've got that whole point, I think, underlined now. Maybe understand now this is how the journey was organized and structured to get all of those kind of questions out of the way so that in week 5 we could get to a question of the heart. Look at page... oh, here we go. Here's another thing. Day 30. Skip to day 30. And the question is, what if you gain the whole world and lose yourself? The issue of taking up your cross. Now, this might be a little much for you. This might be a little much for you. You might want to put it on fast forward. But the issue of taking up your cross. For years I've heard people say that taking up your cross is sometimes when there's something really difficult happening in life, no matter what it is, tragedy or something like that, people say, well, that's just my cross to bear. That's just my cross to bear. Have you ever heard somebody say that? It's just my cross to bear. It's job loss, caring for an ailing parent, an alcoholic spouse. It's just my cross to bear. When I've heard that over the years, I don't say anything. I smile, nod compassionately. But at the same time, I feel like saying, dude, Jesus bore your sin on the cross, and he did it once and for all. He bore the cross. He's already suffered on the cross by bearing your sin, your suffering, bringing you to a relationship with an eternal God. Jesus did that once on the cross. I feel like saying, I don't. I feel like saying it's not your job to bear the cross because Jesus did that already. So for me, what does bearing the cross mean? Well, in a sense, perhaps when we bear the cross, it means that we should be on a transformative personal journey toward agape. Transformative personal journey toward an agape love for Jesus. That's what I've come to the point of defining bearing your cross as. Not just, dude, we're buds, I phileo you, but on a journey, transformative personal journey toward an agape love for Jesus. See if that's crazy or not. If you're watching this in the midst of this series and getting to this point, put some notes on to the Facebook page, the Beyond Question one that I'm doing this for, and say, Eric was just nuts in that. Bearing the cross means, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about where my personal journey has come through too. We are finishing up week 5. We've done 4 and 5 in this. We've talked about the whole issue of using Beyond as a methodology for deepening discipleship. We've talked about the transformative personal journey through Lent, question of soteriology in this video, and the question of the heart in Do You Love Me? In the final video, which I think I'll do out on my porch tomorrow, get a little view of the mountains, I hope, in this sunny day. Look at question number 6. how will you believe what I say? We join Jesus on the road to Emmaus. And like I said, he asks 5 questions on the road to Emmaus when the disciples are going from tragedy in Jerusalem to Emmaus escape. I'll tell you what, there's people in your congregation on the journey from tragedy, whatever it might be, loss, divorce, whatever it might be, to Emmaus, to the place of escape. That's where the disciples were. And Jesus asked them, excuse me, Jesus asks them 5 questions to bring them out of their escape to Emmaus, on to recognizing that Jesus is with them on the path all the way along. That's what we'll be talking about in the next video. I hope this is helpful. If you're listening to this, jump into the Facebook page and put on some notes there. I really appreciate it. Share what you're doing. It is a flat world. Networking, resourcing, sharing is the way that ministry happens. And as I told the people in the class, we as practitioners are the experts in what we do. It's not the consultants, it's not the professors. We are the ones that their boots on the grounds. We are the ones who know how to do ministry. We are the ones who know how to lead congregations. And this is what I'm hoping to provide you with in this, is a tool in your tool belt for resolving congregational conflict and deepening discipleship and bringing people into a closer relationship with Jesus as their Lord and Savior. That's what it's all about. Look forward to seeing you at the next video. Bye-bye.